All right. Well, welcome back to the podcast. I have Lauren Aletta, Inner Hue on Instagram, as you might know her. And we've just had our 30-minute catch up before this. So I always know these conversations are going to be so good as always. If anybody doesn't know who you are, do you want to just give a brief introduction to yourself and then we can just dive right in?
I wish I had that preparation. I always forget that part. I'm Lauren Aletta. I'm an intuitive, so I've spent now 10 years in Inner Hue working with people, doing intuitive readings, and I guess it's just reading energy fields, reading unique people's expression and makeup. And yeah, I've done some other things too. Sometimes I teach, and I've written a book and have some decks, and yeah, that's all I don't know what else to
Yeah.
say.
Well, we met I think it was 2021 because I think it was after the whole pandemic. It was after I think it was right before I went to Mexico, and I went to Mexico in 2021. We had a session. And just
Mm,
like ever since then, I've just have always been drawn to your energy and I honestly view you as one of my mentors, just the
mm,
way that you read energy and you're always so supportive and reminding me of like, what's my truth? How do I feel it? And what do I sense? It's never just like, here's the answer, right?
mm.
Even in sessions, we've had a few sessions over the years and even in sessions, it's very much, you're constantly checking in. I love the way that you do it. And, people are very drawn to you. And I think there's a difference between sometimes people just get sessions with people and it's, oh, that was amazing. And it's like a one-off and they've left it. But I've always just constantly come back to your knowledge and your education and what you teach and speak to. So I've always tried to like partake in every course that you've had over the last few years. And just feel like I gained so much from you. And so I love having you on here. This is your third time on the podcast. And I'm just so grateful that you enjoy coming on here and that you want to come talk to me every year on the
I love
podcast because it's
people.
yeah.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
people. Yeah,
Yeah. And you're 2-4 in human design, your
I
profile,
am.
2-4. And so that's definitely that I mean, obviously the huge hermit part of that, but then there's a very social piece to that profile. So, but
Mm.
yeah.
I
So
think
I
humans are great. I think humans are great, and I
mm,
think that I believe in us, and I say that
mm,
because I guess at the moment the world is pretty chaotic,
mm,
and it can be probably very easy to start to feel heavy about ourselves and about humanity.
mm-hmm,
And we're going through hard times, but I believe in us, and I think that each of us individually knows our own way,
mm-hmm,
and I think that's really what it's about. I think it's more for me not going, I have the answers, oh my gosh, because I so don't. But I'm more than happy to, and I want to riff with you, support someone, or be just actually really curious and really interested in, well, how does it work for you? How do you know? And so, yeah, I love that stuff.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I think especially, lately, I don't know. I try not to get wrapped up. I mean, I don't watch the news at all because I just feel like I'll just be depressed, if I like watch it. And it's like, I feel like in my own system, I pick up enough of what's happening collectively. I don't like have to know everything that's happening. Um, but I mean, it does feel like, I don't know. I don't want to say the end of times, but right. It's just like thing after thing after thing after thing. And I choose to believe, I like that you said that you kind of like believe in humanity, and I choose to believe that we will persevere and that we will rise up and that, even if we're changing timelines or dimensions or something, I think I just watched something today. I don't even know who it was, couldn't repeat it. I don't know, but he was saying something about just how things are just getting weird. Right. And it's like when these things happen, it's like collectively we're rising up, like we're asking to be shifted, and it's like whether we're actually going to shift to another plane on this, it's just, you don't know. I don't know. Would hope that I'm going to the higher plane, but maybe it's not my journey now. Just do the work, and I feel like stay in my lane, and we'll see
Yeah,
what happens. I
yeah,
just feel like I can't stress about it. It's like my life and my work and my inner healing is serious enough that if I added on like the fear of what's going to happen, I just would never smile.
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a period of time where we are being called to be in cultivation of our own like inner spirit, and the recognition of like the joyousness of our own divinity. Do you know,
Mm,
I think that that's important. And if we don't and yeah, I guess this is probably a sort of heavy statement, or perhaps a offensive statement potentially for some people, but um, you know, there is this quote that goes something like, we fear in death because we have no connection to spirit in life,
Mm.
no connection to our own spirit in life. And so then we fear in death, and like that could be a full thing. But especially as we're going through these really chaotic times, which aren't going to end anytime soon, hate to say it. um, um, it's really about then cultivating our own strength and connection to our spirit. That's our anchor. That's what will assist us in being able to see what we're navigating, and to be able to feel balanced and clear-minded, and be able to act appropriately and with intention at given times. And if we don't have that, then we're going to feel really ungrounded and untethered and thrown around by this thing and that thing and that thing, and be forever in a state of like immobilizing fear. I know so many people felt that like crazy energy in that, COVID 2020 to period. Yeah, so I think what focusing on ourselves and doing what you're doing is really that part of being in connection with your own expression and knowing what
Mm.
that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm watching this ridiculous reality TV show, and I don't even ever watch TV, but for some reason I've been called to it in the last like few months. But I'm at like this season where they're kind of going back through the whole COVID times. And I'm like, oh yeah, that really was a thing. Like, you almost forget now how intense it really was for so many people. And I don't know, just like it's just wild to like rewatch, and be reminded of the chaos that was everywhere. And like you said, it hasn't ended, but I think we're like far enough removed from it that we forget, or at least I sometimes do, because I don't know.
Yeah. And see, I'm like, we should not forget. It's actually one of the
Mm,
things that sometimes gets me slightly inflamed or passionate, in again a grounded way. You know, we should not forget that we can make peace with it. We can, sort of assess it and assess the levels of it, to kind of have things appropriately placed where we personally or individually believe things need to be placed. But we should not, it will do us a massive disservice for us to forget that happened.
mm,
We have to have a healthy relationship. Yeah, no way, Jose.
yeah.
Everything that is playing now and forward is still all connected to what happened in COVID. It's
Mm,
still all the same thing playing out.
yeah. Yeah.
So it will be very foolish of us to think that was just a little one-off
Mm,
event and power play. Mm-mm.
yeah. No, I definitely agree with you on that. That I don't know. I follow people and I hear things, and there's just that's why it's just so fascinating, right? Like I was literally talking to somebody today. I was like, I just want to know like all the secrets, like what's going on, because there's so much behind closed doors that we have no idea what's happening, And sort of like to your point too, I think that's why we have to so much come back to ourselves and do our own work, because it's just we can just get so wrapped up in it. In
Well, celebrate our own lives,
mm-hmm,
you know,
mm-hmm, yeah,
make that a point of like, my life is a ceremony, and I'm going to be in ceremony with it. I'm going to celebrate my life, because whether you do or not doesn't change the chaos that's going to be around us.
mm-hmm,
So we can either forget celebrating our own lives and being in ceremony and joyousness, or and sort of feel really awful, or we can go, yeah, I can simultaneously be in celebration and bring that level of joy in, which benefits then the chaos really in a obviously dampening way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I try, when I get into those moments, I think it's very much sort of what we were talking about offline, right? I have to like come back to myself and be like, I can find joy being here. Like just to be here to work, to pay bills, and then to die. That's not what this is about, you know, and we just get so caught up in that day to day. And it's really easy to, because we have to pay bills, you know, like it's a part of our life. And it's just, I don't know, sometimes I'm like, I can choose to be stressed about this, or I can just do it and move on, you know, like maybe I'm not going to Bali tomorrow. It's okay. You know, like
Yeah.
I can go to the next town over, or, you know, whatever. But I think it's, you know, I like that, like celebrating our lives, because it is like, it's just, I think so many of us have forgotten that there's something bigger than us in this realm, life experience, you know? And, you know, you were talking about like the fear of death. And I've wanted to do this like 3 days in the dark, or like 4 days, or whatever I
Oh
can
yeah.
get away with my parents watching my kids. But I
Yeah.
was listening to a podcast and they were talking about it. And they're like, you know, part of that is that when you are so like in the dark like that, and it's just you and your ego and your thoughts and your mind and all that, it's like we fear the dark, right? That is one of our biggest fears, the dark and like death, you know. But they were explaining that once you can sort of like overcome that fear of the dark, you can overcome the fear of death, because it's almost like an ego death, right? Because like when I think about dying, it's more my ego is like, I can't leave my kids, I can't leave this, I can't. It's a very like material thing. It's not, I believe that there's something beyond this, I believe that there's a next life, I believe that I will, you know, like I believe that there's something beyond here. So it's not the fear of that, right? But it's this fear of like, I don't, it's just like the ego attachment to everything that is Rochelle, you know? But
That's an old why am I forgetting the name right now? That rite of practice is an Essene practice. It's a mystery school practice. The 3 days
dark.
in the dark,
Mm.
resurrection. And what they would actually do was very, very carefully medicate after many, many years of development and initiations. They got to the point of being able to handle and feel prepared for going into the 3 days of darkness. But it was actually through a substance that would be very carefully administered, where the individual who was being initiated would be brought basically to the brink of death, and would completely leave their body, so beyond even sleep, into that more like near-death experience level where people have that near death. So there is even the etheric body was more disengaged from the physical body than what it normally is, even in sleep. And there was this really, really often very significant experience that the individual would have, and would see themselves and experience themselves as though they were going through the death process, only to be naturally returned to it. And so lots of other things would happen during that time, that they would be in that state and they would return to it, literally like basically renewed. And it's even hard for us to possibly understand what even that renewal would be, in that the preparation etherically, astrally, spiritually, that individual had taken before going into that. So they're really primed, in a sense, to then be able to perform that right and then return to have a totally different other experience is I think hard for us to comprehend, because we don't have this level of training, most of us, or pretty much. And that's also the resurrection act of Christ. And it is, again, that 3 days, that symbol of resurrection, which is, basically we are rising ourselves up out of our physical body, which is then when Christ appears in the etheric after he dies and he makes the appearance. He is saying, you know, and this too shall be you, which is what we're actually doing when people talk about ascension. And then like, we're going to, you know, poof, go into our light body. And this takes a handful more thousand years. We're in the journey and process of it. the resurrection is showing us what we are moving towards. As we are spiritualizing ourselves, we are rising ourselves up out of our materiality, because we actually descended down into our materiality. Our body is the very last thing that we created for ourselves, and we have our other bodies first. And now we're in this process of ascension. So here's involution, now is evolution, or here is materialization, and now here is spiritualization. And we're in this process of returning to us, sort of our highest spiritual nature, and the work that comes with that. As we both know, like, it's not for lighthearted. It is facing darkness, and a lot of darkness. And then, the more you do this, you start seeing more and more of the darkness in the world, and start to recognize, hang on, this hierarchy that we're working with, it's not just a material hierarchy of, systems and structures and countries and things. We're also working within a spiritual hierarchy that we're all immersed in, that feed into all of these physical structures that we've got. But yeah, sorry, I went on a big tangent, but that's essentially what the 3 days in darkness is, the sort of representation, or the resurgence of where it originates from.
It almost sounds like, from what my understanding of what like shamanic journeys are, right? Because I feel like the whole shamanic journey is to face death, and to kind of like to essentially die and then come back. I'm not, I haven't studied shamanism or anything like that, but just from like what I've understood, I feel like that's sort of sounds similar to that. But
we have to face ourselves after death. That's one of the things that, where people have their life, they speak about their life flashing before them, the process of their life. And that's part of it. It's also then too, when people can get sort of, stuck, like there is a process of after death, or upon death and after death, that we navigate through, a journey that we navigate through, and we have to pass. And if we're still too stuck, our attachments through various things in materiality or in the physical world, we can have trouble moving from one phase after death into the next phase after death. Death, we do have a difficulty with death, and we have a difficulty with darkness. And if I was to bring it back around to even a lot of the things that sort of are happening in the world currently, and a lot of the things that are gonna still arise, is we have to get very, very comfortable with darkness. We will risk ourselves, and we will risk our the beauty of what we could create, if we are going to continue to be too uncomfortable with darkness itself.
Yeah. I'm going to bring astrology in for just a second, but I have Jupiter in Pisces in my 8th house. And so I'm so drawn to the dark side of things. I always have been, but I just always felt there's a part of me that was like, oh, I shouldn't be enjoying that, or I shouldn't want to go there. And so I held like a lot of shame around it. But even today I was at the bookstore and I got a book. It's called Dark Things I Adore, right? I was just like drawn to the book. I was like, oh, it looks interesting. And it has a disclaimer. It says like, if you have mental health issues, if you are prone like suicidal tendencies, like don't read the book, like reach out to somebody or whatever. So of course that like attracted me even more. I'm like, what is in this book? I was going to say,
I would just be like, look at it.
Yeah. So of course I got it. And I'm like sitting here, I'm trying to finish the book I'm currently reading to dive into that. But it is like uncomfortable, and just again, like tying astrology. And I think like some of us just astrologically in our charts, we have a lot of harsh aspects that are forcing us to face ourselves in this lifetime. Like I have some really intense squares and oppositions, right? And so it's like, especially in relationships, and then my emotions are like the two biggest things that are just like, there's so much friction. And so I've lived so often in this cycle of pain and suffering and, all the things. And so I don't know. I feel like I'm drawn to it, but not everybody is like that. And a lot of times I feel like made to feel shame for sort of swimming in that area of life, because it's like, you can't do that. That's wrong, and it's not to say that I'm acting on anything, but it's an interest. Like why, you even talk about darkness or things that are going on with like the world and in realms that we can't see, or things that are happening beyond like what our minds can like understand. And I'm like, but I want to know. Just tell me other things, like what's going on.
I'm with you. I have always equally been attracted to darkness, to
Mm,
shadow, the underworld, to the underbelly. I don't know that I've ever carried a lot of personal shame around it or made myself feel bad,
mm,
but I have always observed or noticed that the fact that I can get in there
yeah.
does or can make other people feel uncomfortable or unsettled. And then other people find it quite freeing or liberating, or that, oh, okay, you know, while I don't want to dive into that, that's not necessarily my thing. I can chat to you, Lauren, or whatever, and you're a nice bridge, if that makes sense.
Mm,
And I think that there are also other people that just naturally they're not made for it, and that's okay. And I think that's one thing that we have to like kind of get our heads wrapped around too. We all have our roles here. We all have our roles. I don't think everybody should be diving into every area of everything.
mm,
It's not what we're meant for, you know.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's
so
also a generation of us that have Pluto and Scorpio, and Pluto is the ruler
that
of the
me,
underworld. Yeah. And Scorpio is drug, sex, rock and roll. I mean, you know what I mean?
oh,
Scorpio is
like
the depth, the darkness, and it rules the eighth house. The eighth house is the occult,
definitely you
you know? So
described
it's like there, I think it's
my
like, yeah,
life.
I think it's, I don't know the exact dates, but it's like early, either early 80s or late 70s until the late 90s is Pluto and Scorpio.
Right. Yep.
So
Yeah.
everyone in that generation, you think about it, they came here to deal with those things,
Mm.
right? It's
Mm.
like people now that are born Pluto and Aquarius, they're here to
Mm.
deal with all the Aquarian things, all the technology, all the, you know, the revolutionizing those things and the rebellious things. And, you know, that's what their purpose is. And
Yeah.
maybe our generation is to be drawn to the darkness so that we can then bring it forward. And we're the ones doing the work for that part of, you know, the whole.
Able to be the labor and be able to be perhaps also the you know, a bit of a doorstop on some things, and a bit of a being able to see into, like, if we've got such, obviously you want to have kind of worked it out for yourself, but if you're more balanced in your relationship with darkness and being able to see and perceive it, then you're incredibly useful for being able to notice, even say with the generation following in Aquarius, be super innovative and all this technology but to be able to have somebody skilled and also be able to go, hang on, or this or that would be potentially quite helpful and effective, as well as also putting lots of like, no more on that, or let's reveal the truth in these things here. Like, yeah, that's fascinating. Definitely. What did you say? Drug, sex, rock and roll, darkness,
The
underbelly.
occult, all the things, yeah. And it makes sense. You know, I see that reflected a lot in that generation of people. But yeah, I love that. And I, you know, Pluto and Aquarius obviously is astrologically a huge thing until 2044.
Mm.
But you know, I think it is bringing in a lot of this technology, which is definitely something I wanted to talk about. It's just, you know, I know we talked about, I think it was on the last podcast episode that we did, you know, we talked about Atlantis and, you know, the downfall of Atlantis and technology and all those things like that, which is obviously still relevant now because it's not something that we're just going to deal with and it's going to go away. So I would just love to, I don't, you know, get into that conversation of what that looks like, because even the astrology is supporting or is speaking to just this shift
Explode.
that's, yeah, you know, and you know, Pluto is power and control as well as alchemization, right? It can be, I think, with any beautiful transformation comes, you know, all the depth of it. I just posted something on Instagram, but it was just about like courage. I was doing a meditation and somebody was asking about like, what was the most courageous thing you ever did? And I thought about it and I was like, in the moment, I felt far from courageous. I was at my lowest point in my life. I thought I was a disappointment. I thought I was a failure. I had no self-worth, like all those things. But in hindsight, I'm like, whoa, that was truly the most courageous thing I did. Right. So it's like these moments that are transforming us don't feel good in the moment. We don't feel like we're doing anything heroic. You know, we're just doing what we feel is right. And in that, you know, through the darkness of all of that comes the change. So long-winded way to like get back to that point. I just feel like with technology and everything that's happening, it's sort of the same thing.
Same thing.
Just in like
Sorry.
that's okay. I was like, maybe she doesn't agree with me. No, just in like just Pluto, right? Pluto being in Aquarius, the energy of Pluto moving through Aquarius, where it's like Aquarius is about technology. So there's gonna be a lot of shifts that are coming. And I think it's discerning, you know, even if you look at like medical devices or energy frequency devices, right? Being able to discern for ourselves, like, okay, this is supportive, but this is actually a little bit on the shadowy side, or this is going to be used for a purpose that is not supportive for us, but we're being blinded a little bit to the usefulness of it.
Yeah. I mean, I could speak on this in so many different like angles. So I think that, yeah, like this period of innovation is going to be massive, and it's going to be burst through a lot through technology, advanced intelligence, artificial intelligence, like all of this stuff. And I I think that it will come with a lot of innovation, or it has the potential to be of service to us in many ways. Um, and I just want to say, even when I say innovation, and I know you're specifically talking on technology, I just think it will be a period of like a lot of ideas, and really like sort of far, or like quite like next level types of thinking, and then potentially innovation. And so yeah, I think different things will come even from that kind of thinking. Yes, technology, but it may even be again different sort of systems or structures or things that will link in them potentially with technology, healing, that kind of stuff. My concerns, I suppose, or what I feel like we perhaps we haven't been really well prepped or well supported for. And I know, I think it's Einstein who had said, and I don't know the quote, so I'm just going to ruin it, but basically something along the lines of, you know, are we yet sort of spiritually developed enough to be able to handle certain types of technologies? I think he was actually referring it to the atomic bomb at that time, which is a technology in itself, obviously. But really just that we we are still quite infantile when it comes to understanding ourselves. We understand our physical form. We haven't yet really properly moved into understanding our other bodies, which very much interrelate into our physical form, into the quality of our health, our mental health, our emotions, our physical body. A lot of physical, emotional, mental experiences and symptoms that we have are because of issues within our energy bodies. And like I was saying, we're materializing, we're descending. So we were actually making our unseen spiritual bodies first before we are able to start to actually bring and develop a form. And so we kind of in a way don't necessarily know what we're dealing with when it even comes to technology. We don't really understand how it's impacting us. You only kind of have to notice or observe even generations. We grew up in an era where we didn't have technology in the way that we do now. I witness my children on their iPhones, on their devices, and see the impacts of that. I remember when we got our first iPad, and it was a household iPad shared. I think my kids were sort of 9, 7, and 5. And the shift and change in their behavior, their energy was super dramatic. Their ability to be able to communicate and effectively communicate in their moods, in like everything, to the point that there was a time where I conveniently lost the iPad for like 6 or 8 months, greatest 6 or 8 months of our life in that time. And so you've got to then start to notice, and we still speak and talk about these things through the psychology of something, which I get, or then the health detriments of the impacts of, I don't know, what looking at a screen does to our sleep or our eyes or different things like that. But I think that it does a lot more as well. And we've just got to define so much when it comes to technology. Are we going more deeply into matter? Are we actually disengaging and disassociating with ourselves? You know, when you go into a scroll mode and you're not even present, and then you're kind of like, whoa, what am I even doing? And where was I for that moment? You're not even there. Or recognizing that when you are engaging in that, like, your energy is fully going into those spaces. So I'm not necessarily saying that any of that is bad, but are we aware of it? Do we have individual self-responsibility and control over it? Are we aware of what we're engaging with in those energies, where we're placing our attention? And then, you know, the more innovative technology can become, is this taking us more deeply into matter? So am I feeling heavier in my body? And I'll save everybody my lecture riffs, but it's also affecting our etheric and astral fields. And so then if we're like, well, we're here in a spiritualization process, but really all we're doing is densifying ourselves, how are we spiritualizing? And how are we able to, when we talk about spiritualizing, where we get our higher a sense of self? You know, when you're really down on the dumps, you're having a really hard time, like what you shared, you know, that rock bottom moment, or that period of time, and you just can't, everything is just bad. Everything is rubbish. You're rubbish. Life is rubbish. Everything is broken. Like, everything is so dense and heavy and hard, and it feels hard to move. And you can't see outside of that. And then naturally things perhaps change, or you manage to work with yourself in a way that you can lift yourself to a sort of a slightly higher, you know, level of yourself, a more bird's eye view. You can get a different perspective. And so you're still kind of, life is the same, but now you're sort of slightly higher up and can see differently. Well, that's what we've got to be able to continuously able to do. And if we lose our ability to be able to rise up and hold that state, know what that feels like, be able to see what choices, behaviors, actions, decisions we're needing to make for ourselves or as a collective around particular events, if we lose that ability because we're so immersed into whatever technology could be offering and could be providing, its conveniences, its level of entertainment, the fact that it's sexy and trendy, then, you know, so there's that side. And then if I was to add, just, you know, for shits and giggles, because we like shadow, is also, who are the creators that are creating this stuff? And are their intentions actually for us? Are they really for us? Is it about productivity? Like, wow, I can now have all my emails and access the internet through here, but the internet is so heavily censored that it's just telling me what you guys want me to know here, because this is really where we're going. And then I can just watch all these levels of entertainment. Is that really for me, for us as a humanity? I think we need to be able to really clearly, in a balanced way, look at that stuff effectively and know what we're dealing with for us to be able to make empowered, thought out well decisions around it. And then, of course, there's, you know, in Atlantis, and it was totally different, because in Atlantis, the quality of earth was different, but human bodies were physically different, vibrated different, slightly like functioned differently. The density, or the literal like quality of earth, even in materiality to a certain extent, was of a different nature. Like air had a different fabric, water had a different fabric, these things. So we cannot apply who we are now, our consciousness now, to back then in Atlantis, or the landscape, the environment of Earth back is the same. It's not the same at all. But we had very, very supportive high technology. And, you know, part of that is, well, how it was really high technology, and supportive high technology came first. And then more and more, as we continue to descend or materialize, and we're sort of slightly beginning to fall from our highest sort of nature of connection. And naturally, Earth is a plane of polarity. So with the good and with the light, there is and needs to be a darkness in order for processes to be able to evolve, having a level of like pressurization and definition. I can't define myself if I don't have something that pushes against me or challenges me, that says, you know, that I have to choose, am I that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also then, as we're sort of coming down, we didn't quite have like an ego or an individuation, and we start to get more of the human ego. And there is a higher mind or higher ego and lower ego. But where, as we're coming down, we're starting to get more power hungry, and we're starting to get individual, and I want to be able to rule, and I want to have the power. And so we went from having high technology that started to become corrupted because of individuals and groups of people wanting to have more control and wanting to have more power, because they're essentially getting more challenged by the fact that they're being drawn down more into density, more down into materiality, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did, in this period of time where we did have high technology, it was very supportive for people, for Earth. And we couldn't reproduce it in the same way, because the densities, things are very different. Even Earth's consciousness, in terms of Earth's etheric field and astral fields, it's all like it's evolved. You know, I'm still Lauren, the same Lauren that I was at 6 months or at 5 years or at 11, but I'm entirely different at the same time. You know, this is Earth, everything here is the same. So I think that there is the capacity for us to be able to develop really amazing advanced technology that can be very liberating and freeing or supportive for us. It's just whether or not, you know, even we have a collective mind or a collective consciousness that's going to value that, for one, really want that. Is there still too much darkness, people wanting power and control, that would want to hijack it, just like it's been? Is it even the fact that that's not going to necessarily be genuinely offered to us? We might get something offered to us that's like, hey, look, here is this like free energy, or here are these devices, or here are these things that, and I think we need to be cautious. And I know this probably just sounds really negative, and I don't mean for it to be. I think that we need to know where we are at in time, and know what we're really dealing with, and know the reality, for us to be able to make thoughtful decisions, or have a discernment and have an awareness, and not a paranoia. Not a paranoia. I'm not talking about that. But we will if we're not mindful, it could take us into places that we will at some point realize, oh, kind of a little bit like COVID. Oh,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, like I think it is very, very exciting. I think it has the potential to be very, very exciting. I think that we are not, what needs to happen progressively, I think, is genuinely a little more education around spirituality, because that actually talks about the unseen. Because this is the other thing. If you're dealing with Wi-Fi, you're dealing with like electricity, you're dealing with Wi-Fi, you're dealing with any impulses that are, you're now within the like supernatural realm. You're now within a more psychic realm. And yeah, I think we have to understand a little more about ourselves and spiritual science for that would assist us in an empowering way.
Mm.
Yeah. Sorry, have I just made everything really serious?
No, it's so interesting because I feel like just we're being disconnected from our bodies through our food, through technology, through, I mean, the technology drives us inside. So we're not even getting sunlight. We're not going outside and playing. You know, kids aren't really like in the dirt. And, you know, I mean, there's so many ways that we're just shut off from who we have the potential to be, you know, that we don't even think about all the other things. You know, I honestly, I mean, I know, you know, Wi-Fi and 5G and like all these other things, they're out there, but it's like everywhere, right? But I think also because we're so disconnected through what we're consuming, through alcohol, drugs, like everything, that there's no way we can even tap into that and feel how it's affecting us because we can't even feel in our bodies to begin with, you know? And it's just
That's part of the challenge. Like that's what I'm saying, that you know, it's up to each individual to either, you know, recognize that for themselves and recognize the level at which they're being called to make any sort of adjustment or change for
mm-hmm,
themselves too, you know.
mm-hmm.
um
I get this
yeah.
visual of like Pink Floyd's The Wall, you know, where everyone's just like marching in line and now we're just like on our
Mhm.
phones or, you know, whatever, but it's I don't know.
1984.
What was it?
1984.
1984. Is that when it was?
The book and the movie.
Oh, I thought you were talking about that's when the song came out. I was like,
Oh,
oh.
the song. No, no, but it's
Yeah,
sort
yeah,
of the
yeah,
same as what you're
yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we had the Super Bowl on Sunday, right? I didn't watch it. Like I went to my parents' house and I ate, but I didn't watch it. I did something else, and then I went home like before halftime, so I didn't see any of it. But somebody was texting me. And they're like, oh, they texted me like during it, but I was at home reading a book. And
Mhm.
I was like, you're assuming I'm watching it. I don't even like sports anyway, right? And they were like, well, I figured you'd watch the
Yeah.
halftime show. I was like, no, I don't even. And
Yeah.
then they sent me the replay, and I
Who
didn't watch it.
performed? I didn't even know
It
who
was
performed.
Usher.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right. I did get told that.
but I love her. If you've heard of her, but anyway,
Heard of her and I've seen, yeah, but yeah, I don't know what work really. But yeah.
okay, well, yeah, I listened to her a lot and she came to
Okay.
Dallas like a few years ago and I missed it. And anyway, it's like a whole thing. So the person was just like,
Okay.
well, I think I saw her, so whatever. And so anyway, so I didn't watch it. And then they like wrote me back like, are you not going to watch it? I was like, no. And now it's like almost like a little rebellious act, right? Because I'm
Oh,
like, I just feel like everybody's watching it that I don't want to be the one that like is like just like the sheep and like, you know, and I know it's like a huge popular thing in the US, right? But it's like,
yeah.
I always think, and I think we had a conversation about it too last year, but it's like we are like in a
I like
hypnotic
the
state.
Snoop one.
Which one?
That was Snoop was last year.
Oh, was
It
he
was
last year? Did
and
I
was it
don't.
Dre? Was that
Oh,
Snoop and
yeah,
yeah.
I did see that one. Kendrick Lamar, Anderson .Paak, Snoop Dogg. Yeah, it was Dr. Dre. All of them were in there.
50 Cent. That was 50
Yeah, it
Cent.
was
It was
also there was someone else. I don't know if it was for not Pharrell, but
yeah.
yeah, it was like that
Okay.
whole
And so
generation of well, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
Kendrick
yeah.
Lamar is a little bit like newer, but there's still I think Dre founded him, and so it was like everybody that like Dre touched. But yeah, that I did watch that one. That was pretty good. But last year's
I'm a
was
sucker for
Rihanna.
that. Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think I watched last year's. But
Okay.
but yeah, it's just interesting, right? Because it's like, you know, I don't know. That's why my thing with even watching TV, like I said, I'm watching this reality show and I don't ever watch it, but my mind, my body, like everything in me just needed to detach and disconnect
Sometimes you
and
need
just
to.
yeah, and
Yeah.
just but it's like because I'm so aware that but also so I do To Be Magnetic, Lacey Phillips, I do like some of her work and she talks about, you know, there's three things to reprogram or three things to manifestation. It's unblocking, expanding and aligned action. And
Mhm.
so she talks about expanders. It's like it's seeing to believe that you can change. And she talks about how because we're in a hypnotic state, when we watch TV shows and we see couples or we see the job or we see somebody like us that can expand us, whether it's a reality show or an actual show, we can actually use that as an expander and we can feel it in our system because we are actually, our mind believes that it's real, right? And so during this show that I've been watching, like for so many times, I'm like, I just got all they do was fight. And I'm like, this is a little bit ridiculous. But then there was this couple that came on and literally everything I'm looking for. And so I actually, for the first time, felt it I was like,
Yeah.
oh, it's possible.
Yeah.
Like it really is out there. So I can appreciate it for that. Right. But I try and discern, I guess, what I'm watching, because I don't want to like, I try and stay away from horror and like murder things, because I can go down that rabbit hole so
Yeah.
deeply. It's like, I'm not just watching it, right? I'm like in it. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I'll have nightmares and things like that. But
Let me know how that book goes then.
oh, I will. I know there was another one that I wanted to get that I had heard was a little bit like really dark, but romance and like all the things. And I was like, oh, but I couldn't find it at the store. So I'll definitely let you know. But that was a
Um,
little side note from like the technology. But yeah, I think it's, coming into, yeah, I guess just discerning, but we have to first find a way to trust ourselves and like feel into ourselves.
yeah.
I mean, I've been plant-based for 12 years, and not to say that everybody has to go plant-based by any means, but I have that conversation a lot with people where they'll come to me, at work or friends or whatever. They text me, is this good for me or is this bad for me? Or like what it's like an all the time thing.
Good with nutrition stuff. I have noticed about you. You're good with body and health stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like my purpose here is to be embodied. And I'm far from, I mean, it's so funny because I say I've been on my period for like 20 plus years, but it's like the week before it, I eat like shit. I'm having all the sugars and I'm like, and I feel bad. And then I go through this little pattern of like low, not low self-worth, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm all bloated. And then I'm like, and then it happens like, that's why it is what it is,
Yeah.
like we're
Yeah.
all going on our own journey.
Yeah.
But yeah, people will like ask me about meat and like what this, that, and that. And I'm always just like, you have to think like energetically. And that's my only thing that I ever say about meat. Like eat meat if you want to, but know where it comes from. Because if you're eating factory farm meat, like you think like just spiritually, right? You're taking in this energy of fear and chaos and pain and suffering. And just like, I can't even like, it makes me want to cry just like imagining what that, I can't even, like, people who work in factory farms, I don't understand it. I literally don't know how anybody can do it. And I know like the whole political thing behind it and whatever, but it's so hard for me. And I'm like, and then you have to think like we are as a culture consuming that 3+ times a day, and it's like no wonder we're angry and frustrated and bitter and all the things, because we're literally ingesting it like all the time. And so, not that processed sugar is any better, and that's like my weakness, especially since I quit alcohol, right? It's like the cookie here and there, whatever.
Yeah.
But I just try and be more intentionally and listen to my body, where it's like, okay, I've had 2 cookies, I don't need the third, I don't feel good, like I don't need it, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
I hear you. I
Yeah.
hear you.
But it's so hard, whether you're talking about food or whether you're talking about technology, because it's just everywhere. You can't go to the store, and the thing with food, like I've said before, it's like we have to eat to live. At least alcohol, you can find a way to stay away from it. If you smoke cigarettes, you can find a way to stay away. You can change your habits and not have to be around it, but we have to eat. And so it's this big draw, and then we're like physically addicted to it, and then we're just more and more detached from ourselves, and then it's this whole cycle of like frustration. Like I said, even in the week before I get my period, when I'm bloated because I'm eating a little bit worse than I normally do, I can even see that in that week cycle, but I can get back to myself after and right myself just from the work that I've done. But I know that that's a huge cycle that people live for years and decades and sometimes their whole lives. And so it's like, how do that's where it gets daunting, right? It's like, how do you help people and support people to find their way back, and I
Yeah,
think
see, I'm always a little bit different in that sense. So to go, no, it has to always be initiated by the individual.
mm-hmm.
Genuinely. You've
Yeah.
got to build up that inner will and that inner strength and that like sort of really it's like a spiritual weightlifting that like, and it's not to have the expectation that you're gonna you're gonna fall off the wagon so many times as you're developing that will and that inner strength.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. That's super normal. It's a total big process, as I know even you and I've talked about, that you go through, your contemplation of quitting alcohol. Like, how long was that? That was probably,
Years.
well, that's right.
Yeah.
And there were probably periods of time where you stopped for a bit and then you got back on it and stopped and got back. And like
Mm-hmm.
it's developing that inner strength and that inner will and creating that. And then that's when, if you've got people around you that you can talk about it freely or are examples of different ways of different lifestyles or different eatings, that's going to support it. But I think it's really unrealistic to have the expectation that you're going to do it straight away. And
Yeah.
It's when you say helping people with it, I think conversations like this, or just living in a lifestyle that reflects your inner truth. And so that can be seen and experienced by other people that come in contact with it. But ultimately, it has to always start with the individual. It's never about going, like that sort of savior. I can save you from anything. It's like, no, I can journey with you. And if you're not into that and you want to, like, and I probably, me, I'd probably get a little bit, person continue to sort of have this, reoccurring struggle of, I don't like this about myself, but I'm also not willing to do anything about it. There's a part where it's like, well, can you accept that you're choosing that?
Yeah.
It's kind of one or the other, but there's this sort of torturousness that happens when you're like, here, I'm not properly choosing it. Even if I fall off the wagon, I'm still like, so I'm going to beat myself up for failing or not properly choosing it, or having a sort of floppier strength still. And but I'm also not comfortable in just accepting that this is what I am and who I am. I years ago I met a person who was a very, 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 very big drinker, realistically an alcoholic. Beautiful person, very, very beautiful person, very, very different, unsuspecting. This person you could totally judge from the outside as being XYZ, and they often did get judged, but was also, very different to how he was being judged as well. And I remember asking one day, out of pure curiosity, would you ever give up drinking? Big drinker, like unhealthy, like really destructive, and not great at times. And really contemplated it, thought like you could see this process of like reflection, at least at that period of time years ago when I knew them. And he said, no, probably not. And I had a mammoth amount of respect for this individual in that moment, a mammoth amount of respect, purely because they were choosing to own that part of them. And I'm not trying to glorify that, but I'm like, yeah, like that's a sort of solid place to be to an extent, rather than being in this tug of war, or rather sort of saying, yeah, I am going to change, or I'm going to be different, when the deeper truth was probably not. And I think we need that level of honesty with ourselves in so many different ways, and then being okay or accepting. Like, it's so freeing. It can be so freeing in going, well, right, this is who I am right now. I've just got to fully accept this and sit with that. And sometimes it's even in that acknowledgement that we then go, oh, okay. Yeah, and fully accepting that this is totally what I'm choosing and who I'm being, and seeing it all in different areas of myself and my life. I really don't want to be that or do that. And so then we have that power to move. But I think that middle place is so uncomfortable.
I feel like that's where I got towards the end of my like alcohol journey. I hated drinking, but I continued to do it. And that's when I accepted that it was a problem. Whereas like everything in me wants to stop, but yet I keep choosing it just for numbing purposes or whatever. And so, yeah, it's kind of like that, where it's like either give it up or you keep in this cycle that just makes you feel awful. I've been taking like gummies, like edibles, like over the summer, not in like high amounts. I just take like half of one. But for a little while, I felt a little bit of shame around that, because I was like, well, now I'm just replacing one with the other. But then I'm like, okay, there's a part of me that at times I feel like this work is so heavy sometimes that there's part of me that wants to disconnect and to not have to like always be swimming in it, and if I take half of a gummy and just get high for, a couple hours a day or whatever, while I'm falling asleep and I sleep better and I dream or whatever, it's like, okay, you know, it is what
Mhm.
it is for now. And that's just part of the journey. But it's like, it's better than drinking a bottle of wine and not
Intentional,
being able to sleep. And, you know,
yeah,
so
intentional use. And, you know, you've already demonstrated a level of, um, you know, having an awareness where something is like, I know when something is, I'm bordering on, you know, unhealthy relationship with it.
mhm.
And look, I don't know, maybe it loops back around to the whole, what is it, Pluto in Scorpio?
Yeah.
Life and
Drugs, sex,
body,
rock
you
and
know,
roll.
there's
I
this
mean,
part
yeah.
that's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you know.
Well, I was editing a podcast today too, and it was a woman was talking about like sober recovery, but she coaches people and she calls it being sober-ish, where it's like you detach, I guess, from the label of addictive, because it's like if you always think that you're an addict, then it's always something that you have to push away and you can't, like, you know. So she works with people to sort of be able to, like, if they want to reintegrate and not feel like I'm an addict, if I have this, I will fail. Right.
Mm.
But she was talking about alcohol, and she was sober for 3 years and had a glass of wine. And she said, just like any drug, it's set and setting, right? She set the intention and she had it was in the correct setting and it was in the correct dose, that she didn't feel like she had to then go drink the rest of the bottle, or, you know. And I thought that was actually really cool way to sort of phrase it. You know, we intentionally take psilocybin, or we intentionally take ayahuasca, or we intentionally take whatever drug it is.
Mhm.
Like alcohol is a drug as well, you know? So I think being
Mhm.
intentional about, you know,
Mhm.
I'm going to have this glass of wine tonight because it feels good. And, you know, I had twice, I did dry January. So I drank a little bit at the end of last year, and I really figured out what works for me and what doesn't. Liquor is a hard no. My body is just like, nope. One
Mhm.
glass of wine, I'm okay with. Two, I feel hungover the next day. So I'm like, nope. Um, but I did have a couple glasses this month, just like I think the first weekend. And I was like, you
Of
know what?
wine.
Yeah,
So
just of
wine,
wine.
what
Mhm.
what works for you?
Yeah, it was red wine. And I just had a
Yeah.
glass. One time I was with somebody that I'm seeing. We just had a glass of wine and we watched TV or whatever. And then another one was like after work with a coworker. And even at that, I was like, you know, I felt better when I was having the glass of wine with the person I'm seeing. It just felt more safe, I guess, or more comfortable to be at home watching TV, just kind of enjoying it in that way. Um,
Mhm.
the one when I went out after work, it felt a little bit more like I don't like an expectation. And you know, I just noticed that my body was doing it just to feel social,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just like witnessing these little things, but that was the last that I had it. And what's today? The 5th, no, 14th. Yeah, no, the 13th. I don't even know
Yeah.
what it is around there.
Yeah.
But I don't feel the urge, you know, I don't feel the drive. I don't feel like I have to do it. I know that I feel better as I am. And I think that was the biggest lesson of a year
Yeah.
sober, was that,
Yeah.
wow, the shadows that came up, right? It was so confronting to date and to go out and be sober in bars or at
Mhm.
concerts and things like that. And so it
Yeah.
really showed me, I think that's where all of my like self-love and self-worth has come over the last however many years,
Yeah.
was literally from the last year.
Yeah.
It's like I am fine
Wow.
as I am. You know, people can accept me as I am. I can go out with people that are drinking and be sober and feel good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. No, it is really big.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not easy because our whole culture values connection over alcohol, you know? And I did it for years, so I get it. But
Mm.
I don't know. And then of course everyone like comes into work after they're hungover. I'm never drinking again. Da, da, da. And then for a minute I get all excited. I'm like, oh, let's do it. Let's get on the sober
Until
train. And then
Friday.
no, even that day after work, they're like, oh, all right, let's go for a drink. I'm like, you guys,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's not my
Yeah.
journey. You know, I have to stay in my lane.
No. And look, you know,
Mm.
sometimes again, it's seasons of our lives.
Yeah.
Seasons of our lives. And I think also to some extent what I'm kind of hearing, even in what you're sharing or how I could look at it, is through that seasons of life. Like there are seasons where, you know, it is more party, or it is more drinking, or it is more, you know, sort of traveling or reckless behavior, or, you know, experimentation of different like potential career paths, or just experimentation in all of the things. And then, you know, there is the ceremony in this season that things just internally start to shift and internally start to change, and you move into a different phase, and then you develop these like a different ecosystem for yourself that reflects that. And so I think it's like, even with the intention, like you're saying, I'm going to intentionally have this, at this celebration, the woman who was talking, and this feels good, and this is why I'm doing it. And I feel that celebration energy around it, or the intentional energy around it. Like that goes into, again, the ceremony of the season of your life, and knowing what it is about for you. Like, know where you're at in the journey of your life, and what the sort of emerging intention is, or the ceremony is that you want to be interacting and experiencing yourself through, or creating. So then it doesn't necessarily make different periods of time wrong either, or different. Of course, it's not to engage in behaviors that are going to be like super destructive and very harmful to yourself and others, obviously. But there can be periods of time where the season is about something that is a little different to perhaps, more quieter stuff. And then there's different times for other things. Yeah. I think that we forget that too, especially with alcohol, or especially with just like that almost like hype culture, which I don't even know what I mean by that necessarily, but I guess you kind of know what I mean.
Yeah.
There's this I guess it's probably linked with well, materialism, in the sense of his success and his achievement, and this is what it looks like. So you could trade out alcohol for a number of different things that we could name on Instagram through different people's, accounts, or different people's messages. Maybe they're not big drinkers, but maybe there's this full other thing that it is for them, particular kind of lifestyle, or yeah. So it's I don't know, I've lost my train of thought, but
well, this is why, and not everybody has to understand astrology or learn astrology, but I found it really supportive for myself in understanding my seasons as it relates to astrology, and to know, for me, Pisces season is a little bit more intense, right? Pisces in my 8th house, all the darkness starts to come up, right? All the detachment, all the escapism comes up, right?
Yeah.
Scorpio season, Scorpio's in my 4th house, right? Family, my personal life, and Pluto's there. So then during
Scorpio, during Scorpio season, it activates in 4th
yes,
house.
because the sun is moving through that, right? So the sun is the brightest thing in the sky, so it's going to shine a light on it. So during Scorpio season, for me, I've gotten divorced twice. It's been initiated during Scorpio season. It just brings something out in the surface, right? Where do I feel really activated? I mean, Capricorn, I have Mars in Capricorn. Mars loves to be in Capricorn. So Capricorn season, I feel on it, right? I'm just like, I got this. I'm moving, I'm creating, I'm all this energy. So being familiar, I feel like, with your chart, if you are experimenting that way, or if you journal and you can just go back and track the cycles, to understand, okay, between now and Aries season, I'm probably not going to be much that productive, right? Pisces is going to pull me down a little bit, and it's going to be a little thicker. I'm going to simultaneously be escaping and be craving meditation, right? It's the time where I kind of hide away, and I'm doing, so I just think it's just a beautiful practice to just tune into yourself in that way too, whether you do it energetically or whether you have astrology.
But I love knowing it. Like, as you know, I don't know astrology. I've certainly know more than what I did. But super infantile. Like but I've been more dedicated over the last years in understanding my own chart, even though I also couldn't, like, basic baby level of understanding it. But it's been so cool to see, like, myself reflected in my own chart, which is crazy. And just to also see how, I guess, different time periods, I suppose, and you've put them in terms of like the zodiac and the movement of that. But yeah, it's helpful. It's super, super helpful, or it's confirmational, or it's insightful as well. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, this whole, and not that I didn't believe in it before, I always had an affinity to some degree of astrology, but it's definitely a science.
Mm,
And I'm appreciative of people like you that I can at times be like, what is happening
yeah.
right now?
Yeah.
And you can put language to it in a way that is like, oh, right, because you're linking it to my houses, and I see I don't even know the
Yeah.
language, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, you got it right. Well, and I've just come to, I
Yeah.
mean, especially through working with you, I've come to realize that that's part of my like gifts, right? Is like seeing it in that way. Like I struggle. And I think it's just a matter of the consistency of actually sitting and tuning in as often as I should, should, whatever. But I don't sit with it as often as I would like to, I guess, right? Of just myself. And I meditate, but am I running energy through me? That happens like every so often. Um, but I think, when I see a chart or when I'm learning astrology, and then that's how I feel like I can more tune into that kind of stuff, right? Is I can see like the depth of it. And
Just your mind, like
Mhm.
you're so quick, like mentally. Like there's a part where, again, I'm going to sound like I'm going to use astrology, but how much like air is this? Not mind, like how much air do you have, or what is it for you that makes you so quick mentally?
Well, I have Venus. So Gemini is in my 11th house, right? So 11th house is your community. It's ruled by Aquarius, so it's technology, innovation,
Yeah,
like all those things. And Venus
yeah,
is, how you show love. It's also a little bit of emotion, but because Venus is in the 11th house and it's in Gemini, which is an air sign. Gemini is super social, right? It's like
yeah,
quick, it's witty, it's intellect, it's ruled by Mercury, right?
yeah,
So I feel like a
yeah.
lot of that like comes back to that. I also have Chiron there. So I held a shadow around intelligence for a long time because I wasn't book smart. I wasn't math smart. I wasn't science smart. So I was like, my brother was
Yeah,
the engineer. And so I
yeah.
think I've leaned more into sort of that Aquarian thing, right? Where there is a deeply spiritual part of Aquarius in all of
Mm.
that, and so I feel like I know somebody asked me too recently about like all the books that I read. They're like, where's that in your chart? Because you're just like so like always consuming information. And I think that's where it is. And then it comes back to, Mercury rules Gemini, and Mercury is in my 10th house of career, public, perception and things like that. Right. So
Okay.
there's always, you
Yeah,
can follow that loop of like so
yeah,
much and it's so interesting.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah.
No, it is. You are very like, it just is like synthesizes, and I'm
Mm,
always like, oh, I can feel this energy, you thinking and processing and integrating it and understanding it. Like I'm like, wow,
yeah.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
way more like,
But even with astrology, like I can't, I mean, with everything, there's pop astrology, there's pop spirituality, there's pop HD, human design, there's all these. And I think that's, we talked a little bit about, I think we did it offline, but it's like that's sort of like the gateway to like I feel like the deeper truths and the
yeah,
deeper meanings.
yeah,
But I learned, of course, everybody comes to astrology with like, oh, I'm a Taurus, like whatever, and like, but then there's like you peel back the layers, and then I just dove into the psychological part of it. So like it's so
yeah,
fascinating to understand what you perceive yourself to be. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, so I don't know, that's how I look at it. It's like I want to understand how your mind is working, how you're seeing yourself, how you are experiencing life, not how people perceive you. I mean, it's cool to know, but
but
it's not as interesting to me. And so that's sort
yeah,
of where I go with it. It's this really, and that's why I love like, you introduced me to Steiner and his
mm,
astrology stuff is just fascinating because there's so much depth to it. It is not surface level. I mean, there are things like there's one book that I have of his. It's like I still have to reread it because I'm like half of it went over my head. Whereas like it is so intense, but I love it. It's like I
yeah,
went down that rabbit hole real fast. You
yeah.
introduced that. I was like, whoa.
I'll introduce you to another, Edgar Casey, planetary sojourns. It's all
Okay.
astrology. It's all astrology. And again, it's in a little difficult language to understand, or it's written in a different style, because it's all channeled material, of the Sleeping Prophet, Edgar Casey
Mm.
Bear. But it'd be interesting to see what you think of think of that, because it's all astrology through it. Yeah.
Okay. I just wrote it down. I'll get it.
And yeah, Steiner, one day that'll click for you. I have absolutely no doubt, and then you can make it make sense for me in
Yeah.
regards to astrology.
Well, there's one of them is I'm looking at the book. That's Adrian Anderson. He interprets one of his
Okay.
books, and I find his interpretation to be easier to understand than like, Steiner directly.
Language.
But
Yeah.
like he said, because of the way Steiner wrote, it can be interpreted very differently depending on who's interpreting it. Right. And then, of course, then you also have like personal lens and experience of like that individual being brought into it. So I've read it from him, and I've read it, a different interpretation. So yeah, I've like seen.
The same book.
Well, he says even some of the words he uses in German can be have different interpretation, which changes the meaning of the sentence. Right. And so if somebody's interpreting a word in this way, it's going to mean something completely different than the other alternative of what that word could mean too. So it's like, what did he really mean based on our interpretation of what he said? So I know it can get really nuanced and heavy, but it's just so fascinating.
I enjoy the anthroposophical perspective of the planets, like that, in some ways, like they're beings. And I don't know if that's what Steiner speaks about, and their different relationships, their different qualities, the fact that we've journeyed or linked intrinsically to these different planetary spheres, and then how they have, again, influenced and created or been a part of our body or our greater body. And they then have levels of rulership over parts of our body, parts of our psychology. Then there's also the hierarchies or the beings that are connected to those planetary spheres. I don't know if that's what he goes into.
Yeah, there's one book that I don't know if I have near me. But it was all about that, right? And he talked about, even Pisces in that time period, and how it's just like crazy, right? And I'm gonna butcher the way that he was like talking about it, right? But it's like Aquarius was that the space between air and water, right? Because we always confuse Aquarius with like because we see those waves. And for the longest time when I learned astrology, I kept forgetting that Aquarius was an air sign. It was like I had to drill it in because but there was an element of it that it was just the energy between, and it talked about the whole evolution of, Pisces, the ankles, and how that time period like evolved. It was just like fascinating. But even at that, there was so much depth to it. And it was time periods that my mind could not even wrap around, where I was like, this was so long ago.
Long ago. Oh, so he's gone really far back, because then things that I've listened to more recently, and you'd possibly find this really interesting as well, is the cultural ages linked to the post-Atlantean epoch, so the period of time that we're in, and how through these different cultural ages, essentially, there were the different zodiacal influences, and then therefore what we were developing through ourselves and our consciousness individually, and then through culture and society at that time. And so that was really also fascinating, although what I hear you're saying is he's going back to sort of the Hyperborean or the Polarian and Hyperborean period.
And then he's got like this whole timeline that I'm just like, I can't even like figure it out right now.
Big. It is big. It is big.
Yeah. But it's so interesting. It's one of those books that I'm like, I want to revisit it again and read it with a little bit more information, and just, it's something you have to go through so slowly. But it is like the pieces of it that I did retain and I did understand were so fascinating.
Yeah.
And he's got like little like poems for each sign, and it's just it's so cool.
Cute. Yeah.
Yeah. But since we're talking a little bit about like the cycles, if you want to go there, I'd love to just talk a little bit about like the 7-year cycles. I think that it's just, we see that everywhere, this like 7-year thing, right? And with human design, we talk about the 7-year cycles of deconditioning. So it's 0 to 7, where we picked up all of our conditioning, and then we're constantly like shedding and creating like a new sense of self every 7 years. And like what we're doing with ourselves and how we're doing the work. And so I would just be curious to know. And I think I read, was it Steiner who did a thing on this, on that? Or there was another one, I think, maybe it was him. I thought there was another book that I had read on that, but yeah, I would just love to, I guess, dive into that a little bit, your interpretation of it, and how we go through these cycles in our life.
Well, I mean, 7 is that powerful number, firstly. As we all know, people can go, oh, it's God's number, especially if you're, more religious. And then 777, which that's really talking about the developmental evolution, that if I'm saying it through that anthroposophical lens, it's the planetary chain, and then the 7 epochs and the 7 cultural epochs. So where, even if you were to look that up, where we are now, we're in the 5th, we've got 2 more cultural epochs. So you can see 7 is really, we've got 7 chakras, the 7 rays of light, like it's a really powerful number. It's or I could say even tone. It's like they say the tone of, or the number of fulfillment. Yeah. So my study has been more through that Steiner lens, and that's just always really resonated with me. And it does require, or how I think most people understand the basics. They'll say, the first 7 years of life are really important. Some people will go, oh, the first 14, if you don't have, instilled these things or supported your child and developed them in these ways, by the time that they're 14, or well, they're gone now, they're more or it can even be taken to 21, which of course is that marker of a rite of passage for at least people in sort of the Western world. But it is developmental phases. We're doing different things. We've got a different state and being of consciousness. So they say within the first 7 years, we're still really deeply connected to the moon and the moon phase. And we're in a very malleable consciousness at that period of time. We're not even fully here or oriented here. And then we move into the Mercury phase, which is from 7 to 14. Often we're more active and ready to learn. We're more engaged socially. We often, if you're going to have health challenges or children that have ailments, they will either raise up over that period of time. From 14 to 21 is governed by Venus. And this is where, and it works differently for, men and women, or girls and boys, is women or girls, the feminine in that time is drawn more inward from 14 to 21. And so there is this more self-consciousness. I'm starting to reflect in who am I and how I'm perceiving the world. And there's this sort of more inwardness that can happen, of course. And too, there's, wanting expression, working out what your own expression is. There's also the drive in Venus is wanting to investigate, I suppose, or try. There's this a sort of experimental element to it. And then that takes us to 21 and the first of our sun round. And we have 3 sun rounds from 21 to 42. And they're developing our sentient soul, our intellectual soul, and our consciousness soul, or these other aspects of ourselves. So when we get from 21 until 28, we hit that Saturn return, we're sort of like, well, what am I about? Who am I about? And where do I want to apply myself? And there is a level of investigating again, or I want to go out into the world, I want to explore, try different things. And we hit that sort of Saturn return age, and that is a massive catalyst and catalyzer, where it's like, whatever is not in order or you haven't dealt with, you're going to be faced off with it. And that can be quite big depending on a person's lifestyle or upbringing, is because we can often see, this is what I believed growing up, or my environment influenced me in these ways, or I took on this belief and it started to impact me in this way. And we start to maybe face that off at that sort of Saturn return. we also make some really big life changes because we start to get a little more sort of serious with ourselves. It's like, actually, what do I like? What is purposeful for me? And we start to get more driven to define what is more purposeful for ourselves around that sort of 27, 28 period of time. And then we want to begin to build that, which is the more intellectual soul, intellectual consciousness period of time. So we're going to start going, oh, how do I make this? And what do I do with this? And I want to start to build it and those kinds of things. And so it continues on. And I mean, I'm kind of very much simplifying it, even though it possibly may not sound like it, but it's really, really fascinating. Because even within those 7 years of time, they're actually also influenced by the planets. You've got the influence of the Saturn and Sun and Moon and Venus, and they're influencing through each year as well as a bit of an undercurrent. And everything builds upon each other. So things that, again, we haven't properly developed will at some point be really faced off in looking at, and things that we do develop nicely or integrate nicely, we're going to have a greater strength or clarity around how we use ourselves. And it carries on right through the course of our lives, where we're in these processes of initiation, and those 7 years do have a theme and they do have a purpose, and it's much easier to see them looking back than it is necessarily when you're in it. And you can kind of go, right, like that's what that phase was really all about. And you're going to either feel, to many extents, how well you honored that within yourself or within your life as you're starting to transition out of it. And then again, whatever you didn't properly turn up to, you're going to then be compounded with it. So from 35 to 42, let's say, is really about, and then again, especially from then 42 to 49, but it sort of starts between 35 to 42 and continues on, but you're building upon it, is being very accepting or recognizing the beauty of yourself within, your own spirit, your own soul's intelligence, your own gifts, your own talents, the work that you've put in these different ways, and that it's increasingly not defined by your physical beauty or your physical, or even in many ways, external successes, especially if you know that that's one of your coping mechanisms. Like I may not be all about my physical beauty, but I'm certainly about my fancy things in an unhealthy way. And again, I'm not saying fancy things are bad, not at all, but we all know when we've got a little funny thing going on, right? And so, it gets harder naturally. We're going to get older. We're going to keep getting older. We can't stop that. That's an incredible gift. But it's where we are to be developing ourselves to the point where we are in this radiance. We're in this radiance. And this was the whole purpose of elders too. And as we move through these different phases, we're no longer about who am I, what am I about? And then we move to, well, now that I'm working who I am about, I'm able to be of service to that. So whether that's your family, whether that's to a career path or to a wider community, you're like, right, I worked out who I am and I'm now being really in service to that. And there's still an educational development around this challenge of really sort of like juicing yourself for your best work. That is a part of it, and we're challenged by that between 35 and 42, and then between 42 and 49 we're quite challenged by, we're really like, we could give up on ourselves. We can start to think, well, I'm getting too old, or I'm past my prime, or I don't matter anymore, those sorts of things. And we can have these little niggles and these little things that it's like, oh my God, but there's this one looping idea that I continue to have, this thing that doesn't ever leave me. Like, there is a detriment that can come when we discard that. That does cost us in ourselves in different kinds of ways. And so there's this like challenge where we have to like no, like I'm not going to succumb to I'm now too old. It's something that burns inside of me. But that obviously can be different for everybody. Maybe this person was very, very successful, achieved a lot, great achievements, produced a lot, created a lot. Well, maybe their reoccurring thing was, oh, I got to chill. I just hang with the family and I can afford to take all these years off. That may be the thing that they find most difficult, right?
Mm.
Like, or it can be vice versa. I'm a homemaker, but I can't let go of this idea that keeps, and what are we going to choose? So those things are really, really important, because otherwise, there is that risk, and we again can have met these people in our lives. We get to certain age where we start to, at all times, whether or not it's noticeable, and energy is really what it is that speaks, is, you know, who you are and how you've expressed and honored and defined yourself through the course of your life. And it's not for things to be perfect or for you to be perfect, but to how you have turned up and continued to develop, that is honoring of yourself and respectful to others. It does show. You can either be, it starts to show in our health, it starts to show in the quality of person that we are, especially as we're moving into then our 50s and our 60s. And see, here we move into those ages where, again, we're more being of service to a wider community. We're not having to be so focused on who am I or my family and the creation of my career or using myself in these ways. It starts to be a little bit now like, I've matured enough to be able to more clearly interact at times with more global affairs or broader community affairs, and it is, again, this spiritualization. You can see it in our bodies. By the time we're hitting 42, the energy is starting actually to leave our lower bodies. This is where we start to potentially experience changes in our physicality. We start to lose muscle strength. We may start to go through perimenopause, very slowly. There is this physical shift that is representative of spiritual change, and those energies that have been down in these lower centers throughout these periods of building time, like of the younger years, like they're being lifted in order for us to now use them in a, again, like higher perspective of ourselves. So I think, again, like we're disconnected to many degrees from this, and I think there's lots of like industries that really push needing to stay young, especially around women, or defining our beauty, or our value and worth by our physicality or materiality. And yet, those special people that you meet. I've been very blessed with my grandparents, in particular, one of my grandmothers, absolutely just radiates this lightness of spirit and this joyousness and this intelligence and this like individual, this love that she has earned, because she didn't just get that without any hardships. She had plenty. She earned that. And how she contributed to all of the people. Like, it's like we need to, again, redraw back in our elders in many senses, and also recognize that that's what we are becoming. We have this responsibility. The life isn't just about the success or the achievement. Again, those things are great, wonderful, as defined, but as an elder, who are
No, I was gonna say,
sorry.
I feel like just when you think about like the meaning of life and like what I'm here for, it's never really like the success, right? It's like, I don't know, what is my purpose? Maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel like there's always like a deeper, maybe
Success
the
is,
success comes from doing the thing that you're supposed to do, right? But it's like a
well,
byproduct of.
can I be myself?
Mhm.
And what does that mean? Who am I? And can I be that? you know, and then that comes like, I mean, I'm sure even just here, I'm like, I'm all hands and faces, but the truth of it is, this is me. Like, there's that part that, like, if I can let myself be that, that's kind of, I'm successful in that way.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
success.
I guess, what is your definition of success?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think then when you bring in, again, work and life and school and education, like, we have stripped it dry of recognizing the ceremony of what we're doing. And we're seeing these changes in education. Um, and, you know, I don't know, we'll just leave it at education, but there's changes around death, there's changes around birthing, there's changes around like lots of different things. We're starting to see into stuff, the sacredness a little bit more, the spiritness in everything. But if even especially schooling, like, I believe children know their own way wholeheartedly. They know their own way, they know what they need, they know what they want to experience. Like, I'm talking at, if you can support appropriately and they can, like, be influenced, sure, by environment and information and education, but not to the point that it's like so dry and forced upon and regimented, and basically like any level of imaginative thought or innovation, like super, like, school done differently is a beautiful example of how ceremony into life, and you could come out of school being so excited and passionate for who you are, and have developed yourself in ways, and perhaps be a little more equipped as you move into later life, as one example. But I think we could apply that in so many different ways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it works with the planets. So you go, Mars is 42 to 49, then I think we move into Jupiter, and all of these things that influencing that sphere is radiating and influencing then who we are, and then what we're rediscovering or discovering for the first time about ourselves through those ages. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. Is there like a theme of sexuality at all, like in the 30s?
Yeah. Yeah, huge. From 35 to 42, it can be described as a second adolescence.
Okay.
Um,
Mm.
um,
Yeah, I
and yeah,
resonate. I'm 37. So that description of 35 to 42, I was like, that is 100% what I feel like I'm going through. But with the sexuality piece, I feel like in the, everyone's like dirty 30s. That's like sort of like a saying or whatever. But I definitely feel like it's been the last, yeah, I guess the back half of the 30s where it's because of the acceptance of myself and
Mhm.
understanding myself and getting to know myself. Now I know what I like, and it's easier to communicate that and, and enjoy that in a way that I didn't before. So I was just curious if that was like a theme, like
The total theme. I know, I'll have to, like, I've written out, I don't even know how many words. The amount of words and the amount of documents I have on my computer is totally insane. And it just sits there.
yeah.
I'm going to finish things off eventually. But yeah, I've kind of gone through in each 7-year period.
Mm.
And then, yeah, like, I've, of course, naturally really enjoyed working with 35, 42. Even in reflection, it's just fascinating because I notice all of these themes in clients.
Mm.
I can nearly, like, sometimes I'm like bang on in their age or know what cycle they're in, purely in their energy. Or they can say, okay, I'll be like, hey, how you going? Why are you here? Or what brings you here? And they'll be like, blah, 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 blah. And I'll be like, oh yeah, this is repeated theme, person after person after person, obviously unique to them in different ways, but it is so clear. And that's what essentially got me really fascinated into then the 7-year cycles. Is it was like, man, I'm just seeing this like for years, like, wow, has there been material written on this? And of course Steiner,
Mm.
um and his linkages into the planets, and then of course the development and how it works with the etheric body, with the astral body, with the different levels of our consciousness. I'm like, right, I'm all in, let's go.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah.
interesting. I think you had shared a book in your stories once, and I like immediately ran and got it. I can't remember what it's called though. That's why I was like, I'm not sure if it was him. It looked like it was a white book with a door or something. I feel
Yeah.
like it was a woman. Was it a woman or was that Steiner?
No. I don't have the recall mind that you do. I
Okay.
can grab
I
that.
can just like see it. I feel like the
Um,
book is like changing
it is
something or
taking charge.
yes, taking
Taking
charge.
charge.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, um, I want to say it's Bernard Livergold.
Okay.
I think it's a gentleman.
Okay.
But yeah, don't quote me on definitely that
Mm.
author. I'm very terrible at recall. Like,
Yeah, I can just like I see the cover and I see the title,
there's
but
a
I don't
there's a
remember.
few, yeah, and there's a follow-up book from that as well. So it's almost like a companion book
Mm-hmm.
by the same author. And yeah, I mean, Steiner's written lots on it in all sorts of different ways as well. There's another one that touches on it, but it's about the human body or the human physiology, and it goes through the development or the purposes of why our body is shaped and built in these different ways, the different systems, and reflecting different age. Yeah.
That's Steiner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Well,
could be like, it's like lifetimes to study with him.
I know, right? Do you know what that one's
Yeah.
called? Did you say it? Or
Oh, but
if you can send it to me later
um,
if you find it. If not, it's
yeah,
fine.
I'm just so bad at recall with that stuff.
Yeah.
It's in
It's
my
so
cupboard, it's
interesting.
in my bookshelf just here.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, if anyone, I know there's I know we're pushing the 2 hour mark, and so I know you're busy. I don't want to like keep it going. But I mean, if anybody that's like listening here, they're just like wanting to dive into it with themselves and just learn a little bit more and just understand just even just beyond what we can physically see. We sort of touched on like technology and Wi-Fi and spirituality and like other realms and things like that. But is there anywhere that you would recommend that they can sort of like start?
Mm. I mean, you're not going to be surprised by my answer. I'm going to say start with yourself.
Yeah.
Like, come in and feel like something in here and wait for it, feel into it, trust and know that that's going to go okay. Think you're going to be shown the book, the person, the material, or even if it's just the insight within yourself that may arise around something like that's we have to start in here. We spend way too much time in our heads and external and placing an authority above ourselves for information and other people that know. And don't get me wrong, that's like good. People, we can learn a lot, but it has to come from an inner directive. So I know that there's me always coming back to that, which you said at the very beginning or opening,
Yeah.
is it's trusting in yourself, feeling into that. If you don't have the answer, you don't get the ding, you don't get the insight straight away, that's okay. Notice how that makes you feel. It makes you feel uncomfortable, or I don't like it, or I feel helpless, or I feel out of control. Like, be really curious about those things, but still stay with it, and then trust and know, but I am going to know, it is going to appear, and feel it out. What is this drawing me towards? And you sort of like, almost like, it's a weird analogy, but kind of like when you're trying to work out what you want to eat for dinner, especially on a particular day, and you're like, what's the taste I want? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Please validate. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not
Taurus sun.
the
I got you.
one. Yeah. And so you're like, but it's the same thing. It's like, I get like, what is this energy of this thing that like you're working it out like that. Dance with that, or flirt with that, or be in the process. We can make that as, and I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. It's true. It can be super bloody uncomfortable at times. Like
Mhm.
there's that, but it can be as uncomfortable too as what we can make it, or we can get ourselves as frustrated as what we can. So yeah, that's my genuine, authentic answer.
Yeah. Well, and one practice that I got from you is that, in feeling the feeling or diving into all that, like be as, I don't know if descriptive is the word is, but I'm like, what color is it? What shape is it? What texture is it? Right. I think the more that you play with it and explore it, the more it's going to sort of give you something. And I don't succeed every single time, but sometimes in actually giving it a shape, then I can either release it or just have more communication with it, and so I always kind of come back to that. And then I would say one thing that I feel that I've been very successful at lately, which has been years of work. So this is not something that's going to happen overnight, but just the ability to sort of let my mind do its thing, but not believe it. And I'm telling you, like,
Right.
I have been struggling with that my entire life, where I was like, all those stories and everything. And now, like, even today, I was in the kitchen, I was sort of going down the rabbit hole, and I was like, huh, that's interesting, mind. Think what you want, but that's not our
Yeah.
reality. Like,
Yeah.
keep going at it. It's taken a long time to get there, but I think it's with practice, it is possible to more so come into the body and sort of the mind's always going to do what the mind's going to do because that's what it's here
Mhm.
for. And I
Mhm.
think it has a beautiful place, but I also think that it's full of shit sometimes. Just like it doesn't need to
Completely.
be our truth. It is your
No,
truth if you allow it to be.
try. Yeah.
Mm,
That's an achievement. I'm much better at that. And then of course I have periods of time where I'm better at that. And then other
mm.
periods of time where I totally suck at that. You
Yeah.
know?
I mean, there are times like in emotional dips, obviously, that I'm like, but I
Yeah.
notice how much more quickly I'm able to get through it. Like I
Yeah.
had I had a moment today where I was texting someone, they were asking just all the right questions to sort of stir up this feeling in me, right? That I
Mhm.
wanted to explore. And I probably will like even later, just dive into it a little bit more, right? But I noticed my mind going that way and I was going down that dark hole. And but I moved through it and I just was able to tell my mind like or tell myself like this is I'm witnessing what my mind is doing, but I am not that story. And so it was
Mm.
like an hour later, I was sitting in the couch and they sent me this really deep like thing about like hard times and this and that. And I was kind of like, I'm already over it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like I'm
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely something I felt like my ego or whatever. I was like, I'm kind of proud that I was able to get there. And not to say I'm going to consistently be in this stage for, the remaining whatever, but it's being able to get there a little bit quicker is,
Mm.
through these practices, I think is really beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
just where I'm at. But
Yeah. No, it is.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, well,
It's
thank
good
you. Yeah.
also celebrating other people's like wins and
Yeah.
achievements. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love like one thing I'm definitely taking from this. You said it a couple times too, but just like celebrating yourself, celebrating life, celebrating like everything that it is to be here in this human experience, like as messy and as chaotic and as painful as it can sometimes be. It's like there's always something on the other side of that. And it's like that is the point of being here. It's not always going to be like butterflies and roses. It's not.
No, and celebrating your life. Like, I think we're just so indoctrinated, especially through social media, that, my life is like this and not like that. And so therefore I'm living a lesser life, or I'm therefore less, not as important. And it's rubbish. It's
Mm-hmm.
rubbish. Or it's only as, has as much power or importance as, again, what you give it. Like, I think all of our lives are so beautiful and important regardless of level of status or hierarchy too. So I think that, yeah, we're all navigating the same things in different ways. And yeah, the celebration of it, often the smallest things are the most have the most impact, the most important. Like, you got to be given a beautiful bunch of flowers, or you could have this surprise flower. Like, my daughter often will come and she's got pick some flowers for me, and it's like,
Mm,
wow, it's like
I love that.
these things that it's like, just pay attention to these small acts and these small moments of beauty.
Mm. I'm reading the
Yeah.
book No Bad Parts, and it's Richard Schwartz on IFS, Internal Family Systems. I don't know if you're familiar with
Mhm,
his work,
mhm,
but he gives this example because he was just talking about like all these different parts in your system. But he was giving the example of like once we realize that like we're all connected. We're all one. We're all like all that. But he was talking about the color purple, and the one Shug, I think is her name, but he was saying that she was sitting there and she had this moment where she was like, oh, like if I cut my arm, the tree bleeds, you know, and like how this interconnectedness of like all of us are. And she like ran around the room for a minute with this just like realization of like, oh, you know, it's all connected and it's all beautiful. And I was like, oh, that's so true. Like I haven't read that book since like high school. Like I don't remember like, you know, in detail, but it just, I would love to, I know sometimes things like that where I'm like, I wish my consciousness was at a different place when I had read things like that. So to like take it in,
Yeah,
but it was just like a little beautiful reminder of like, yeah, we are all, you know, we're all connected and nobody's better than the other. And if I bleed, you bleed. And it really is like all the same. And all the noise
really.
is just a distraction from that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. As always, I love having conversations with you. And yeah, everything is going to
We
be.
could do it for another 2 hours,
I
I
know
know.
we could. That's why I like looked at the time and I want to be
No, that we
respectful.
good.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I'll link everything, and of course, in the show notes how people can find you. But if you just want to let them know where they can find you, if there's anything that you're working on that they can expect to come out, or anything you want to let them know.
uh, stay tuned. I'm full of surprises. Who knows? I'm just things will happen, but I don't know what they are yet. So
It's gonna be good though.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's things. So yeah, mystery box. Look at me like Lucky Dip. Come along the journey. Um, and Inner Hue. INNERHUE, so innerhue.com, and then just innerhue on Instagram. I really don't show up on Facebook anymore. Sorry, beautiful Facebook people.
I'm not a Facebook.
And then I don't like, I mean, you will attest to this as much of whether this is a positive thing or a not very good thing, but I do send out emails when I have something important and valuable to say. They are lengthy essays on something, but I do try to make sure that they're worthwhile. So I don't also, if you join the email list, I would love it, because it's really a place that when I do invest in there and go, right, I've got something really important that I want to say. Often the email people are the only people that receive it. I don't, and it doesn't go going anywhere else. And it's quality read, I feel, or I really, that's why I'm doing it, but they don't happen too much either.
Yeah.
So
when I see your name in my email, I'm like, okay, I'm blocking off 20 minutes. I'm getting a tea and we're digging in, because it's always so packed and powerful and just deep. It's not just a, hey, what's up?
I know people have been so kind, and they tell me they have a Lauren folder in their inbox where they put all my I know my
I love that.
I know. Like, oh my goodness, that is so cute. Yeah, so that's where you can find me. All of these places.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It'll be late for you. Oh, it's 222. I just saw
there you
that.
go. 10:22 for me, 2:22 for you. Beautiful.
22 for you.
Yeah, that's right. I just
Yeah.
I have it in regular time. I always like still, I'm like counting out my fingers. I'm like, wait, 23.
Which one is it? Yeah. Thank you so
Thank you. Of
much.
course. Thank you.